Cleveland Film Talk takes you behind the camera lens and introduces filmmakers from the 37th Cleveland International Film Festival. Today's filmmakers explore social and environmental issues to open a global dialogue. Our first guest, Emanuel Vaughan-Lee, directed the film Elemental. Emanuel, how did you take the efforts to save the Ganges River and distill it into such a relatable story?
Well, the Ganges story featured in the film is one of three stories that interweave to tell a larger story about our relationship to nature on both a global and local level through the efforts of people who have committed themselves to trying to overcome the tremendous ecological challenges that they're facing and we're all facing. And the approach we took overall and in the story in India was to tell it through a very personal and human lens. So rather than try and educate our audience about the complex issues that are facing India's Ganges River, but rather to take them on a journey of somebody who is trying to change his country's relationship to its most vital and precious resource. And in that case, we followed him from source to sea, from the glacial source of the Ganges, 1,500 miles to where it meets the sea in the Bay of Bengal, and chronicled his adventures, his trials and tribulations, and the struggles that he went through during that process. So it was an adventure both for us and for him, with lots of twists and turns. But luckily enough for us, there was an outcome to his journey that was able to, help us form a narrative that also interwove with the other two stories.
How, as a filmmaker, did you deal with some of the twists and the turns that occurred?
Sometimes better than others, sometimes by pulling our hair out and being really frustrated. So, in hindsight, probably, always more patience is something something I would have learned from this film, and specifically shooting in India. And sometimes you just got to let things play out. So it's always a learning journey when you're making a film, because you go in with an idea of how you want it to be, and you're pretty set on how you think it might work out. And of course, within day two, that's out the window, and you're flying by the seat of your pants trying to make decisions about what best to do.
What was your background before making this film? How does one learn to make movies?
Well, I have no formal training in filmmaking. I'm actually a high school dropout. I got bitten by the jazz bug when I was very young and started playing professionally when I was 15, acoustic bass, and ended up going to Berklee College of Music and studying improvisation and composition, and spent the next 10 years performing and touring all over the world with jazz musicians. But kind of by chance, I had an opportunity to work on a film thrown in my lap, and I was intrigued by the idea and thought I'm going to do both film and music. And within a year, film had taken over and music had fallen by the wayside as far as my professional career. And I ended up learning on the job, on location, traveling, often great advice from friends and colleagues working in the field who would give tips on how to do things, and slowly kind of honing my craft, and obviously still honing my craft.
What was one of the more unexpected lessons that you learned?
In relation to this film or in general?
In this film, yes.
Oh, well, I think that, we had a very kind of ambitious, project with this film. It's 3 stories all over the world. And so logistically producing that and following those characters' journeys when they're so different, in location, was something I don't know if I would do again. It was just very, very taxing and challenging. And also the approach we were taking was verite. So we were following the characters' journeys as they unfolded in real life, rather than interview-driven stories. So which was a great tool to work with as far as storytelling. But logistically, I think trying to pull off a story that's unfolding in India, Canada, and Australia, and sometimes traveling to other parts of the world was a bit much.
I can imagine, and even in all that shifting and going from place to place, there may have been some places that you related to a little bit more, some characters. Were there any people that you started finding yourself being drawn more to their story?
Well, I think each of our characters had different attributes that they brought to the film, which is why we chose them. So I don't think I had a favorite. I think they all had different contributions to the story we were trying to tell as a whole. In India, our subject, Rajendra Singh, comes from a culture which has a deep and ancient, religious, spiritual, and cultural connection to the natural world, to the sanctity of water and the role it plays in our lives. Our Canadian character comes from the Indigenous community in northern Alberta, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, with, again, a very ancient understanding of the role nature plays in our lives. And then here we have a scientist based in Australia who has a deep personal connection to nature through his own life, but is looking at things from a more Western, scientific perspective. So there were very different overlapping things that each character brought that we found interesting, engaging, and learned from.
When you're balancing the footage from these disparate places, how did you handle in editing, knowing when to stay with one place, when to move, or how to interweave them, as you really do a nice job of doing? There's a saying that in documentary, you often find your film in the editorial process versus in a narrative filmmaking, it's scripted and more controlled, and of course editing plays a part. But in documentary, often you've got 400 hours of footage. In our case, it's almost 400 hours of footage that you have to sift through and distill down into stories that both work in their own right as individual narrative arcs, but then also collectively tell a larger narrative arc. So it was quite a process of sifting through, building those storylines, and then finding ways to intersect them and where they came together. Luckily, we had a wonderful editor, Pedro Cos, who just really brought tremendous vision and perspective to the editorial process and allowed us to try and create a cohesive story out of these three disparate stories. And I understand you did start have a connective tissue you started with, and it allowed you to marry your music background with your filmmaking background. Talk a little bit about your composition of the musical score.
So I wanted to be involved in the music for this film and writing the score, and from the outset had the idea that the score could play a role in bringing the stories together, being a cohesive voice that would help the stories intercut, that would provide a theme, a connective tissue to engage the audience in these different stories and how they're unfolding. And we wanted to integrate the creative process of writing the score into the editorial process. Normally you score a film almost after it's finished, but what we wanted to do is write the score, or the most of it anyway, before we started editing it, and then edit the film to these cues. And so sat down for a week at the piano and wrote the majority of the themes and cues, and then you cut the film to that. And then of course what happened is our editor, who's wonderful with music, would then have an idea, oh, it'd be interesting if we did this, a particular cue, and then we go back and write it. So it was a really organic process, and a fun process for me especially, to engage that part of myself in the creative work of crafting a film. And we were able to record it, with an orchestra, which has always been a dream of mine. So we were able to go to Bratislava and record with a symphony orchestra there. And it's primarily an orchestral score, which is not so common in documentary, but we wanted to have that kind of more narrative feeling in the film, and what an orchestral score can bring to that.
Are there any moments where you were in the throes of that, where you said, why did I put this challenge in front of me? This is such a great idea, but as you're doing it, there's a certain amount of then pinning moments and finding a rhythm. And how did you know that even though this challenges here, my instinct is telling me to continue, that there's something good about this?
Well, that definitely occurred both in the filmmaking part of it and in the scoring process of the film. And it was just, sometimes it was just day by day. You approach each challenge as it comes. Sometimes you question yourself. Sometimes you have to follow through, and you see the result only days or weeks or months later when things come together, and you're questioning every process along the way. But we had a great team. Filmmaking is always a collaborative process, and that allowed us really to collectively bring together ideas that would, distill into something that we hoped would have, something unique and profound and different to say. And in the scoring process, as in the directorial process, it was a collaborative effort. So a co-composer and a co-director, and collectively we are all able to bring things together.
Excellent, very good. We are here where we have both a media arts program and a recording arts technology program at Tri-C, and I think one of the things that both students would be interested in hearing about your process is how do you take the kernel of an idea? How long does it muse and just sit with you before you start writing, before you start composing?
Both are different processes for me. Sometimes in composition, I'll have an idea and then I can sit down to the piano and I'm able to create it, and all of a sudden it's a song within 20 minutes, or it might take 2 days. And with filmmaking, it's a bit different. You have an idea for a film, you sit with it, maybe you do some research, you start looking into ways a story might be told, and then you come up with a kind of basic thesis, and then that thesis then moves into a more formal treatment as you start researching the stories and the characters. And that can take months, or it can take years, depending on what else you have going on. So I think in essence they're similar. It's just for me, writing music, it can happen a lot faster. At least, creating a song, if you want to orchestrate it for a full orchestra, then that takes time.
Right.
But still, I think the music process is a faster one than the filmmaking process, which takes more time to kind of, whether it's research, whether it's production or it's post-production, it can take months or years.
More time to get it together.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I know that our students are going to appreciate hearing that. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for bringing your film to the Cleveland International Film Festival and sitting here with us at Tri-C in the Media Arts program to discuss your process.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we will be right back.
I chose the media arts program at Tri-C because I fell in love with the camera.
I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, and I just never thought it was possible.
One of the things that makes the Media Arts and Studies program different from some other programs is we really marry a study of the art of story and story structure with hands-on, real-world production experience. Just for an example, our students in their first year will get introduced to the equivalent of a 1-ton grip truck worth of media equipment, and at the same time they're breaking down scripts, they're breaking down treatments, and they're learning about how the structure of the story is going to influence every other thing they do in post and all the way through distribution and marketing.
I was surprised by the quality of the equipment that the school provides, because it is professional equipment, stuff that you will see in the industry.
I was definitely surprised and overwhelmed with all this equipment that they have to offer. It's very exciting to be able to have that hands-on opportunity and to learn all the ins and outs of this stuff.
The faculty who teach in the Media Arts and Studies program come from a range of disciplines. So we have working cinematographers, and we have editors, and we have motion graphic artists, and of course they're all educators as well.
They are working in the field that we are all trying to get into, so they are very informative to tell you how things really are, so you don't show up to a job and are completely shocked.
The collaborative opportunities that are available to Media Arts and Studies students are limited only by their own pre-production, really. We have had students collaborate with dance, with theater, with recording arts and technology, and even automotive technology and fire training academy.
I've collaborated with some of the photo students. They can take stills and stuff, and they have cameras too. So there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate and learn more.
Another exterior shot.
The faculty is extremely supportive with our creativity, with our projects. I've yet to be limited on what I can bring to the table as far as story.
I'm able to be that artist. I'm able to be the one in charge of that visual design that I want to get across, and I have a lot of fun doing that.
You don't really have to go to New York or LA to live your dream. I mean, it's right in Cleveland.
Today's second filmmaker, Ariana Delawari, chronicles her journey to her father's country, Afghanistan, in her film, We Came Home. Ariana, your film is a little bit different in that you're also recording your album as you're filming the documentary. Can you talk about why you decided to blend those two creative processes?
Actually, it happened really organically. I was just documenting my travels to Afghanistan, starting with my first trip in 2002 after 9/11, and my parents had just moved back, and I was just so captivated by Afghanistan, by the land. Like the second I saw the land from the plane, I knew that I needed to make art about it, and I just graduated from film school. So I was documenting my trips not knowing what the film was about. And about halfway through this journey of 10 years, I'm also a musician, and I just very organically started writing songs about my experiences. I never integrated my experiences of Afghanistan into my music yet, and it just happened after visiting a refugee camp. And so then I started documenting the making of the album, and it all just became one, like all the trips and my family story and the album. It wasn't really a plan, it was just organic.
Was your family surprised that you used your family background and history in your film and in your work?
No, when I graduated from film school, I was acting and making music, and I was like, I don't want to direct right now. And my parents were begging me to make a film about Afghanistan. And I was like, they were like, Ariana, you're supposed to make this film. And I just resisted, but I was documenting. I just felt very sensitive to Afghanistan and to my people, because I felt like if I'm going to represent this, I really want to live it first and really meet people, and I want it to come from my heart, and I don't want it to be a concept. And so it took a bit of time.
Growing up in LA, did you feel removed at all from your family's background and culture?
No, I was immersed in it because I was born right when the Soviets invaded, and my dad's entire family moved over and were living in our house for a while, and my Afghan grandmother didn't speak English. So like Dari was my first language, even though I'm not fluent now. As a child I was. So I was totally immersed in it. I was also very American, so it's always been both.
Yeah, one of the things that I like about the your documentary is the blending of these two. It's not as though you leave, you know, kind of America behind. It comes with you. Was that a conscious decision, or was it just natural because that's your experience?
I mean, it's just natural, and I love to travel, and I love so many countries and so many cultures, and I feel like we're living in a time where home is defined by so many things. It's not just where you're born, and so that was definitely something that was a big theme, because it's like there is home and here is home and anywhere is home, and so yeah.
What was one of the more difficult aspects of filming We Came Home?
Well, it's really the journey itself. You know, there were times when, there was kind of a time in 2009 when I felt heartbroken. I went to Afghanistan and I felt like things were getting worse, and I was so young when I started this journey, and I was so naive, and I was like, you know, this is the beginning of peace for Afghanistan. When I started to see it get kind of worse in ways with suicide bombings and Taliban resurgence, I felt totally heartbroken, and it was like a fall from grace. Like I was like, oh my gosh, you know, the reality of what's going to happen if these people are left behind. And I don't mean that just like in this military sense of like, you know, having soldiers there. I mean like from our hearts, that as a planet, it doesn't matter if it's United States, Afghanistan, you know, South America, Africa, wherever we're talking about, this interconnectedness, that we should care about each other. And so that was really hard. And then in the actual filmmaking process, editing was challenging because there were so many things I wanted to talk about, and I was like, okay, you know, we have to trim the fat, because even though this is fascinating, it's not serving this story.
Right, right, which is hard to do a lot of times as you're creating films. As you are now on the stage where you're bringing your film to festivals and you're having audiences view it, what's something that you're finding Americans are learning through your film about Afghanistan that they may not have known before?
Gosh, so many things. The whole history, I mean, we definitely touch on the history from the Soviet invasion onward. Americans don't understand that, you know, simple things like bin Laden was an Afghan. Or that, you know, in the 60s and 70s, women were you know, they had rights. They were educators and lawyers, and they could do whatever they wanted and wear whatever they wanted in Kabul, at least. Also, I think, you know, what's so beautiful is they all say, I want to go to Afghanistan after seeing the film.
Yes, yes.
That's really cool.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
It must feel good to you to know that they're seeing it from your eyes, from your perspective.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of craft and talent to be able to bring the story to film and have it reach audiences the way it is. How did you learn to make films? You mentioned that you attended film school.
I did.
What was that process like for you?
I went to USC Film School, and when I first got into USC, I was a poetry and photography major.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't know. My mom was like, you have to apply into the film school. You're at USC.
Right.
And so it was really, actually, it was serendipitous. Like, my cousin's father-in-law was David Wolper, who like invented the documentary. I mean, he produced Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and he was this legend. And I was at like a family party, and my mom was talking to me about it, and his son, who was my cousin's husband, was like, you need to meet my dad. And I met him, and he was a champion of me, like, from the get-go, because I had such great grades, and he saw my art portfolio, and I swear he's the reason why I got in.
Wonderful.
And then once I got in, I was so happy that I did it, because I was fascinated. I mean, as a child, I loved cinema, and I wanted to be a director, but film school was something I'd never thought about until I was already in it. And it was such an honor, and the faculty were incredible. So once I was in there, and I felt like I was like let into this secret society, and I felt like really lucky. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. There's like, we get to create worlds.
Right. Yes. And how important do you think sort of that mentor relationship, I mean, maybe it didn't bloom that way specifically in your example, but that someone took a personal interest in you and walked you through that?
Well, it's come up so many times. I mean, then, you know, in film school, William Fraker was my cinematography teacher, and I was like the only female in a class of 8 cinematographers this one semester. And I was like, wow, this guy is a legend of cinematography, and he's like old school. So he shot in black and white, like Westerns in black and white. And that kind of training was so vital. I mean, it changed the way I look at everything, you know, because he was from the old school. He was like, start with one light, and we'll build from there.
Right.
So with a film like this, you know, this film isn't about the cinematography, it's about the story. And so I was thinking, you know, how do we, this is a very raw film, and it has a very like home video element, so how do we push that? And that's when I brought in, you know, so many different mediums from the past, from Super 8 to VHS, and even like with the news clips, I made a decision to use news footage that had been sitting in our garage that my dad had kept. Because I could have asked the station, like, give me the clean version, but I was like, no, I want these like old, faded,
gritty,
weird.
Yeah, it gives a texture to the film.
Yeah. So it's been really cool. And then, of course, working with David Lynch on my music was like another filmmaking mentor
That's amazing. Let me make sure that I understood that.
Okay.
David Lynch?
Yeah, the filmmaker.
This is someone with a similar name. This is not the...
No, the David Lynch.
Mulholland Drive, David Lynch.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was really beautiful. Like, he came to my first show, and I was like, oh my God, David Lynch is in the audience. This is one of my favorite artists of all time.
Right.
And he said he wanted to produce my music after that night, and I didn't believe him.
Now, and that, I just have to, that's a wonderful collaboration, that it's from seeing your work, that then it speaks to him and wanting to connect. Continue. I just had to like, that's got to have been.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow.
So after, I didn't believe it, honestly, and then like a year later, after I had started recording my album in Afghanistan, he was like, I wanted to be producing your album, like why? And I was like, I didn't believe you. So we did this one song together called Suspend Me, and the experience was so incredible. And since then, you know, he mixed the album, put it on his label. He did this little video for me, and I get to go and, you know, watch him work sometimes. And he watched our first 3.5-hour rough cut of this film, which was like, I was sitting there like, and all of a sudden I'm like, we're showing David Lynch a 3.5 hour rough cut of this
right.
Like,
how do you in that still keep your own voice and still define yourself? Because I will say that watching this film, what I think is strong is it didn't feel like, oh, this is a David Lynch film. You know, he didn't. You however you worked, you didn't. So talk about how you kept developing your voice and made yourself distinct.
David is an incredible human being who I've been blessed to have in my life, and he would never. He's not the kind of artist to like encourage someone to be like him. He's the kind of artist that encourages you to be like you.
Excellent.
He's a very authentic person and very wise. And
Wonderful.
so the biggest thing I've learned from David is his work ethic, actually. He works from like 8 in the morning till 8 at night, 365 days a year. He's not concerned with how he's seen. He's just really in love with his work. And to me, like as a young artist, it's the biggest lesson. Like there's no shortcuts. You have to immerse yourself. And so.
It's clear that you have done just that with this film, and in doing so, you've immersed us into your journey and into what, you know, being both American and Afghani. And I think I really appreciate that. I know our audiences appreciate it. Thank you for sitting here with us at Tri-C and sharing your story with our students here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Cleveland Film Talk.